they have 3,000 metric tons of gold, but it was about $150 billion of the $600 billion. So they got about 24% of the reserves of gold.
In this interview, Jim Rickards discusses several concerning issues, including the situation in Ukraine and the failure of Western sanctions against Russia. He highlights Russia's slow and methodical approach to warfare, emphasizing that they are winning decisively while Ukraine is losing badly. Rickards critiques Western media's portrayal of the conflict and points out the failure of financial sanctions to influence Russian behavior. He also discusses the depletion of Western arsenals and the challenges faced by Ukraine in its conflict with Russia. Additionally, Rickards criticizes the U.S. policy and warns about the potential consequences of freezing Russian assets, suggesting that such actions may backfire and hurt the United States more than Russia.
I try to get a good night's sleep, and I try to be angst-free. But if you're asking whether any of those issues are cause for concern, the answer is yes. You mentioned 5 or 6 things. I could probably do 1 or 2 hours on each of them. So we don't have 12 hours, but we'll try to get the same. But yeah, they're all cause for concern. And interestingly, they're all connected in certain ways. So you can find connections if you take Ukraine. Maybe the most direct, I always tell people, pretty much everything you read in the New York Times, the Washington Post, LA Times to Reuters and others are just wrong or outright lies. It's very difficult to get good sourcing on Ukraine. It took me a while. It took me about 6 months, but I've developed that now. And I've got kind of reliable sources from a number of channels. But the bottom line is that Russia is winning. Decisively, people don't understand the Russian way of war. They're never in a hurry. They're very slow, methodical, thorough. They put up a great entrance defense, and then they fight a war of attrition. They basically annihilate the enemy without ever attacking because the enemy attacks them. They invented what they call crumple zones and make a sort of advance, but not in great strength. And then the enemy counterattacks and they retreat. And then the enemy moves forward. But what they don't realize is they're going into a kill zone, and they get a massive artillery drawn and bomber bombardment and get annihilated with very high casualties. I think there were 500,000 dead Ukrainians since the war started. So a war that never should have happened. It was really a failure of us diplomacy, among other things, but where that never should happen. But now this far along, be 2 years old next month, just to be clear, Russia is winning. Ukraine is losing badly. They're running out of man. USA, ID has dried up, that's tangled up in the Congress. They can't get Ukraine aid passed through the House, the Senate. The Europeans have stopped giving more money. Hungary has a veto. They might get a little bit dribbles over a 5-year period, but not anywhere near what they need. You see Zelensky running around Davos with 10 cup. Trying to get money, comes back empty-handed. The economy's a shambles. A lot of the money we give them just goes to pay, government salaries to the oligarchs and the neo-Nazis. So, there's this idea we're fighting for democracy in Ukraine, which is nonsense. The US is having elections this year. Russia is having elections. Ukraine canceled their elections and the rest of their political enemies. So, show me where the democracy is. That obviously doesn't exist. So, but on the financial side, which I think our viewers might maybe be most interested in, the financial sanctions have been a complete failure, about to get worse. By the way, I'll spend a minute on that. But I teach financial warfare, seminar financial warfare at the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and when I did it 2 years ago in April 2022. Right after the war started, I went through the sanctions. It's a small class, about 1,213, all handpicked mid-career officers, lieutenant colonels, Navy commanders, some civilian CIA, State Department, and a few others. But it's an elite group there. They've been kind of handpicked as the future, big brains, by always asks how the whole classes are doing, future 3-star generals or deputy national security advisors, etc. And the class was very gung-ho, was right after the war began. I said, just so you know, the sanctions are going to fail. And they'll actually be worse than failure. They'll boomerang and hurt the United States more than they hurt Russia. Russia will not change Russia's behavior. And that sense will fail in terms of the immediate objective, but the actual action of the Russian economy will be fine. So then I taught the class again. this well, 2023, May 2023. And I said, by the way, in the 2022 cleanse, I got a lot of pushback. I guess everyone was gone. And that's okay. A seminar style, and you're supposed to have different perspectives. So that's a good way to do it. In the 2023 class, I said, here's what I told last year's class, and I was right about everything. The sanctions had failed. They had hurt the United States. The Russian economy was fine. All the oil or natural gas that Western Europe didn't want, they sold it India and China. The Russian ruble was steady, has gone down a little bit, but not much. But the idea that, Biden, we're going to destroy the roof, but we're going to crush Russia. Not true. I mean, he actually doesn't know what he's talking about. The Russian economy is outperforming the U.S. economy right now. The only economic problem Russia has is they have a labor shortage because as their economy is running so hot that it's actually kind of hard to find people to fill all the jobs. But that's a good problem to have a little bit of inflation, not much actually lower than the U.S. And that'd be Lena, who's the head of the Central Bank of Russia. We say she's the only central bank in the world who actually understands her job. She raised interest rates a little bit just to cool down the inflation. They're on a complete war footing and making several million 155 millimeter artillery shells per year. Now over to the United States, UK, Western Europe. Our arsenals are depleted. We've given Ukraine, in some cases. Almost everything we have, the UK is out of Storm Shadow missiles. The US is out of 155 millimeter shells. Germany, France, same thing, no on your 55 millimeter shells left. That's why we started giving Ukraine cluster bombs as a form of artillery, called a cluster bomb, because we didn't have any more of the regular shells. We've given them, I believe, for maybe more, but at least for Patriot anti-missile batteries. The Russians have blown up 3 of them, destroyed 3 of them with their hypersonic missiles. The Patriots, they can shoot down a cruise missile, certainly a drone or other types of missiles. But they can't stop a hypersonic missile, and the Russians have done this goal. Missiles, so the Russians just fire the Scale missile and the Blog Patriot systems. They're about $1 billion a piece. So there's $3 billion gone. So the Ukraine is running out of cruise missiles, storm showers in particular. Their Patriot systems are either blown up or don't work. There was the famous Leopard tank, the Jeremy supply Leopard tanks, Ukraine. They went out on the battlefield, got blown up. There were just all these images of burning Leopard tanks everywhere. The U.S. actually called Ukraine and said, because we have sent them some Abrams tanks, and said, please don't use our tanks because we don't want pictures of the Abrams burning on the battlefield. It's better for sales. So the Washington Economist, fine Ukrainian economy scarcely exists. Russia is winning the war, but they're taking their time. They're not in a hurry. The famous Ukrainian spring, fall, spring, summer, fall. Counteroffensive, it made a few miles. He got like 2 villages. And then they were pushed back to complete failure. They lost half their Bradley fighting vehicles, their Leopard Challenger tanks. Their air defenses are gone. There's nothing stopping the Russians from doing whatever they want. So that's a complete disaster now. So you say, well, how can you make that worse? U.S. policy has been completely misguided, or how can you make it worse? But leave it to the White House to come up with a way when the war started. We and NATO allies froze Russian assets, any assets we can get our hands on. So if their central bank reserves, Russian central bank reserves were in Western banks, many of them were frozen. And it's about $300 billion, mostly in U.S. Treasury securities. The entire reserve position was little under $600 billion. Russia very intelligently put 25% of their reserves in gold. So they had about 150 metric tons of gold. There they have 3,000 metric tons of gold, but it's about 150 billion of the 600 billion. So they get about 24% of the reserves that go, we can't touch that. It's one of the attractions to go with physicals, not digital, so you just put it in the vault and keep an eye on it. But you can't freeze it in the banking system.